The most important place in Iceland, the most historical place in Iceland, the heart of the island, if you will, is called the Thingvellir, which in translation would mean the assembly plains, because you have Thing, which is the old assembly in the Germanic-speaking world, and you have a plural form, which is Vellir, from the singular form Völur in its old form Volur, meaning plain, so the assembly plains. This was the site of the old parliament, or a form of parliament, as we shall see, between 930 and the 13th century. And in this video, I'm going to explain to you why it was that important and what was decided here, as well as the structure, organization, and so on and so forth. The area, however, is also a geological wonder. We are in a very active area, volcanically speaking, very close to Reykjavik, the capital. It's only a 45 to 50 minute ride. And we are in an area with a major rift, with fissures and cliffs showing the intercontinental drifting. And it is shown in a very, very visible way, which makes it very special, outstanding scenery, and perhaps one of the reasons why the ancient Scandinavians also chose this area as one of that importance. But also it was quite accessible from all parts of the island, maybe a little more difficult if you came from the north because you had to cross the highlands. But yeah, this was a place of historical significance. It was the backdrop for the General Assembly, known as the Althing. Althing is the contemporary word for parliament in Iceland still. And they organized assemblies here between 930 and 1798, so a very long time. However, from the 13th century, the political significance was not that great as it was in the medieval period. And here you can find fragments of booths. You can see them in the landscape. So you can see how people tried to construct temporary accommodation in order to take part in these assemblies, and they were made of stone and turf. There is also a church, but it was built later on, and there's also a farm, also built later on, as well as remains of agricultural use in the 18th and 19th century. So definitely a landscape of historical events and showing us this ancient system of governance. However, like I said, it's also a geological wonder because you essentially walk through the rift. You walk between the North American and the Eurasian tectonic plates, and you can see how new land has been formed in this region. If you look at the map, and if you go on a tour, if you want to go to Iceland, you can take the Golden Circle tour. That is going to take you to Thingvellir as well. Or you can simply book a bus and go visit it by yourself. So I did both, and it was definitely more interesting when I visited by myself because I could actually see everything and I had plenty of time on my hands. So you're going to stop somewhere near the lake. There's also a very important lake here with species of fish and birds and so on. And from the visitor center, you're going to go through Almannagjá. Gjá is a word meaning rift or chasm. And if you're going to go through this rift valley, you're going to reach in no time the Lawspeakers. So this was essentially the place where the Lawspeaker stood and recited the laws, and people used to gather on the banks of the Öxará River and listen and then discuss, negotiate, take part in arbitration processes in courts, and so on and so forth. And if you go further on, you can also see a beautiful waterfall called the Öxarárfoss. Foss is the Scandinavian word for waterfall, and there are also smaller rifts in the area such as Flosagjá or Háagjá, and here you can also do some snorkeling if you're into that kind of thing in the Silvra fissure, which is by the lake. And later on, so in the let's say in the 20th century, they wanted to celebrate the assembly planes, 1,000 years from the assembly planes, actually, and they built a couple of houses here that now serve as the summer residence of the prime minister, and you can see them on the Thingvellir. This was the site of the old farm, and you can also see the church here. So definitely one of the most interesting places you're going to see here in Iceland, and if you're into history, it is a place that must be seen by all means. The importance of the rule of law in the history of Iceland can be beautifully summarized with a quote from Njál's saga, the saga of Njál or Njól. And this quote states the following, you can find it in chapter 70, Með lögum skal land vort byggja en eigi með ólögum eyða. So this is in Icelandic, not Old Norse, and it states that with law our land must be built or lawlessness will lay it waste. So here you can see this crucial importance of law, because without law, so without some form of regulation, there would be chaos on the island. Now, let's understand a little bit the historical context of the development of the Thing system. Well, the rights of farmers in Iceland were actually typical for Scandinavia in the Viking Age, but they were more extensive. The system of decision-making that not only considered the rights of kings, but of other political actors is something to look out for in the history of Scandinavia, with the difference that in Iceland, this development was in isolation from the rights of the higher strata of Viking society. And this led to a higher importance of the free farmers, as well as the development of a distinct body of law. One critical point in this development is the fact that you needed structures that were powerful enough, strong enough, reliable enough in order to deal with intergroup conflicts. This was extremely important because, after all, you're dealing with an island where resources were scarce. Well, actually, when the Vikings came, you had plenty of woodland, for example, but that was cut down very, very fast. And they were also struggling with food production, for example. They needed pastures for the sheep to graze, and so on and so forth. And definitely there was a lot of conflict regarding territories and resources. And in order to prevent the infighting, you needed very well structured laws. So the structure actually functioned quite well, and it only broke down in the 13th century. So now let's see what the structure actually was that was so effective. Well, first of all, you needed procedures and you needed regularity, and for that, the chieftains were the ones responsible. The chieftain, with the term of goði, godar in the plural form, he wasn't a king. A chieftain was just a more respected and knowledgeable free farmer. So the Godar were responsible for the different meetings, but we don't really know the composition, the exact composition of these meetings before the year 960, because in 960 some constitutional reforms were introduced. Now, the most important before these reforms was the so-called Thing, which literally means the gathering during the spring. Now, generally speaking, the purpose of the thing was to guarantee the rights and to solve conflicts. How long this meeting would have taken place, we don't really know, perhaps a week or between a week or two. And these things, these meetings we are discussing, they took place as a regular body of decision making between the years 930 and 1264, because in the 13th century there was a series of prolonged conflicts that ended up with Iceland coming under the jurisdiction of Norway. But overall, in this period, we are dealing with quite an effective system based on a lot of procedures, as well as reforms to make them more efficient. As I mentioned before, first of all, we have these meetings during the spring, and we have, generally speaking, 3 local chieftains responsible for organizing them, and they do it in collaboration with their thingmen, so with their followers, who are actually required to attend as representatives of the respective households. And with the passage of time, this structure evolved to 12. So they were distributed around the country, and among the first ones, the first gatherings we can find in Thorsnes, which is in the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, and Kjalarnes, which is in the Reykjanes Peninsula, which is the peninsula where the capital city is located. So to summarize a little bit what we've learned so far, first of all, they tended to organize these assemblies during spring, thus the name Vorthing, for example, in these places in the Reykjanes and Snæfellsnes Peninsula. And then in the middle of the 10th century, a division of the island took place, a more effective one, and also the Althing came into being. Mind you, we find this kind of information about the structure during the Viking Age and the medieval time, early medieval time in the history of Iceland, in later sources, in later legal texts. The sagas do mention the things and the Althings quite a lot, but they don't really give very concrete information about how these worked and how these were structured. So it's very likely that they weren't as structured as we would like to believe, but there was this continuous process that made them more and more suitable for gatherings. So in the middle of the 10th century, let's say roughly 960, 965, the island was divided into 4 quarters, and each quarter had 3 chieftains. So that will give you a total of 36 chieftaincies, but there was a 13th Vorthing added because the northern quarter tended to be, well, nowadays it might seem strange to say that, but it was actually the most populous and also the largest one. But so 3 further chieftaincies were added in the northern quarter, with the difference that they weren't allowed to hold court by themselves. The term for chieftaincy, by the way, is called goðorð. This was the office, so to speak, more or less. In the beginning, it probably also had something to do with the chieftain having the responsibility of holding the heathen rituals. The name Goði itself suggests that. But at any rate, it developed into a strongly political role. And as you can see here, we have the quarter of Western Quarter. So these would be the Western Fjords. And then the Southern Quarter that also contains the Reykjanes Peninsula with the capital. Then we have the Eastern Quarter, and as you can see, the largest one here, the Northern Quarter, with each of them having 3 springtime assemblies, and a little bit later, a 4th court was added for the northern quarter. So we have this division going on from the 10th century, and the Goði, of course, had their thingmen as followers, and some of them accompanied them at the spring assemblies, and then further on at the Althing. Mainly the assemblies dealt with prosecutions, and the courts were called sóknarþing if they were dealing with such allegations, for example, of somebody committing a crime, somebody stealing something, murder as well, and so on and so forth. And there was a different court, the skuldaþing, dealing with debt that needed to be paid one way or another. So the Goði, the chieftain, had to name 12 bander or binder. These were the farmers, the peasants, who served as panels of judges. So the system was basically made up of panels of judges, and they participated in litigations, and they also participated in out-of-court discussions. So as you can see, it was a mix of formal and informal elements. And one more thing, the assembly had the right and the responsibility to set was the standardized ounce, which was very important for commercial transactions, because these assemblies were not only political assemblies, they were also commercial, economical assemblies. Now, we do have reference in the sources about an autumn assembly as well, called lathe, but this one did not have any judicial function. It was just organized in order to report to those who stayed at home what happened at the assembly, at the Althing, and it defined who the thingmen of the chieftain were, in fact. Which brings us to the next point, the Althing or the Althingi. What was this, in fact? This was the annual meeting at Thingvellir or Thingvellir, the assembly place, and it took place in June, in summer, and everyone gathered on the banks of the Öxará River, including peddlers and brewers and all kinds of merchants, and it was hustle and bustle. It was very vivid and colorful place. 2 weeks time, so people would engage not only in political discussions but in all kinds of transactions. It was indeed, we can call it a sort of national assembly, because it was for the whole island, and it was absolutely essential to take place in such a gathering, because it was an opportunity for you to cement a political alliance, or to forge a new friendship, or to do some good business. So, when discussing about the political system in Iceland in the Viking and medieval times, we need two essential terms: the law council and the law speaker. Lögrétta or logretta, I think, in the older pronunciation. Lögrétta is the modern pronunciation, and then we have the lögsögumaður. Again, modern Icelandic is maður. We have this ending ur, and in Old Norse it was just the r as a nominative case. But yeah, just as a side note. Anyway, you can recognize the word law here, which is actually very interesting, because the English borrowed the term from Old Norse, so that is very telling in terms of these cross-cultural relationships and how much Old Norse has influenced the English language as well. At any rate, the Lögrétta is the law council, and this presupposed the fact that the chieftains had the right to vote, and they also brought two advisors. The law council was the representative for the foreign affairs. So, in the dealings with the Norwegian crown, for example, it was the law council, the one responsible for it. And the system of governance, at least at this National Assembly, was public, so everything was discussed in public, which is why the people sat in three concentric circles, with the chieftains sitting in the middle circle, so they could communicate with the advisors in the outer and the inner circle. And there was actually only one fixed building, which was a church built in the year 1118. Otherwise, the chieftains had these turf booths, most likely roofed with homespun. And actually, if you look at the landscape, you will see different layers of such booths, depending on the age. Now, there was only one official, which was this law speaker, the lögsögumaður, and this was the chairman of the Lögrétta, elected for 3 years, and he had responsibility to recite the laws. And since he was elected for 3 years, he recited 1/3 of the laws every year. And he also was the one who could lead discussions on legal issues, as well as introduce corrections. He also announced the laws passed by the Lögrétta, and he also furnished some parts of the law. He, of course, had some legal experts on his side. He knew a lot, but he couldn't know everything, so he needed some legal experts as well. However, he didn't really have any official power as we would conceive it today, like an office, because he could, for example, participate in litigations as well, in feuds as well, as a private person. So that's also very interesting. And if you wanted advice from the law speaker, you, as a citizen, should also, as a free farmer, should have been able to ask him the right questions. And the sagas are full of stories about how people learn how to do that. So they go to chieftains and ask for some kind of legal advice, or then to the law speaker, and they learn to ask the proper questions about what to do in a legal case by telling stories about similar cases. Yeah, they tell each other, they communicate all the time, and they learn how to ask the right questions. So this was also something important to do as, let's say, some kind of political education at the time. And law speakers were also important at the time because using the name of the law speaker, you could determine what age you were referring to. We have in the book of the Icelanders, written by Ari the Learned, Ari the historian, we have a list of law speakers, and so as you would have lists of kings in Scandinavia or in Europe, generally speaking, in Iceland you don't have lists of kings, so dynasties. You have lists of law speakers, and then again you also have lists of chieftains, but the lists of law speakers were definitely more important. And on top of the list you can find, for example, the law speaker Ulfjotl, who by tradition was the one who went to Norway and learned all about the legal system in Norway, and then came to Iceland and produced something similar, or adapted it to the conditions present in Iceland. Now, I should also mention the fact that we do have something called a supreme chieftain, the Althing. Well, this was a highly ceremonial position, so it didn't mean more political power. The main responsibility with this function was to hallow the Althing and essentially organize the area of assembly. And this was the hereditary chieftaincy of Thorstein Ingolfsson, who was the son of the first settler of Iceland. Now the reforms that were introduced in the year 960, very important to centralize the legal system. They were the consequence of a conflict between two people called Tunguod from the Borgarfjord and Thingvellir from the Breiðafjord. So initially, if you had a manslaughter, this would be judged at the local assembly nearest the scene of killing. So that meant if you were from outside the district, you could hardly have your rights defended in the area of the accuser. And this is exactly what happened in this conflict, because this guy Odd from Borgarfjord brought suits at the Thingnes assembly, and he engaged in a fight with the defendant, with Thord. He fought him both there and then at the Althing. So then the chieftains thought, wouldn't it be wiser to just split the land into quarters with 3 things in each, and also introduce some courts of first instance? And it turned out it was actually a good idea. So it was decided that such cases of manslaughter could now be brought directly to the Althing, so to the National Assembly. And for that, some new courts were established. So we have 4 new quarter courts established at the Althing as courts of first instance, as well as appellate courts. And this leads us to a revision of the number. So we have chieftaincies. Now we have full chieftaincies, and 39 the number, because we have 9 in each quarter plus 1 more thing in the northern quarter, which would give you 39 chieftains. However, these governmental structures likely did not operate as systematically as we tend to believe. But at any rate, a balance of power was necessary here, and it was established that they should have Godi for 3 new chieftaincies from the other quarters as well to balance it. So you essentially had 39 plus the new ones, 9 more, and a total number of 48. However, the new chieftaincies, so the chieftaincies besides the initial 36, were not allowed to nominate judges themselves. Now, many disputes were, however, not resolved in these courts. They were resolved informally, so to speak, and these courts rather had the very important role, nevertheless, to serve as standards for arbitration. So to show you how you should proceed, not only at the court but also outside of the court. And some people actually didn't really like to go to court because, like I said before, this was not a private negotiation. This was a negotiation, a process in the public arena. So that meant a lot of third parties were involved, and not everyone liked that. However, what these reforms show us is precisely this, that the system wasn't really that centralized before. So it confirmed the decentralization based on these relationships between farmers and chieftains, more or less formal, and they all point out that the more centralized system is actually the system we know from the later laws. All in all, we can say that we are dealing, nevertheless, with a pretty balanced system, and the dispersed spring assemblies with approximately equal number of local inhabitants guaranteed a more or less equal access to the Althing as well. Now, what was the purpose of all these assemblies and courts? Well, it was to create one big legal community and establish a group made up of juries and chieftains and the law speaker, a maximal group with the great responsibility to end fighting and to ensure peace. We also have other examples, some intermediary assemblies called the Fjordugathing, but these were for local affairs only, and they were overshadowed by the National Assembly, the Althing. And following the reforms, one important thing, a case would be normally heard in the court of the quarter where the defendant dwelt, which made a little more sense. And in the quarter courts, we most likely also have the number of 36 judges, and this jury was to deliver a verdict. Now, you needed to be nominated by a Gothi, one of the 36 from their districts, and in order to be nominated to be part of a panel of judges, you needed to be 12 years old and you needed to belong to a household. So you needed a fixed domicile. And from the proposals, most likely lots were drawn, and in each court, panels were drawn from all divisions of the country. And this was done in order to discourage regional alliances, regionalism. And also standardized decisions were discouraged. People were encouraged to look at every case with objectivity and to regard each case as a particular one. However, one problem here was that verdicts needed to be more or less unanimous. So if you had more than 6 people who disagreed, then you would come to a deadlock, which wasn't really productive, and that meant you would need a court of appeal. Now, this all sounds very neat and tidy, but it wasn't, because there are a lot of informal elements present here. In practice, your success for a verdict to be drawn to your favor depended on your ability to draw political support from important chieftains, generally from important people in not only in your district, but generally speaking from the whole island. And one of the last reforms that was introduced was in the year 1005, a fifth court of last instance, where verdicts could be drawn with a simple majority, and that made the situation much easier. And truly, the last reform in this whole system was when 2 bishops were included in the law council, in the Lögrétta. So essentially, this was about finding workable solution for all the parties involved, as well as power brokerage. So these assemblies were a political arena where chieftains could display power, muster more power, find followers, and negotiate a better position for themselves. So if you're engaged in a conflict in Viking Age or medieval Iceland, there were a couple of options to solve the conflict. One option would have been the self-judgment, the sjálfdæmi. So you essentially, as a defendant, gave the accuser the power to decide on a solution, and for this to happen, you needed to trust them quite a lot so that they could put forward an acceptable solution for you as well. Then you had the option to engage in a duel in the Holmganga or the Einvigi, but this was actually part of the older heroic Germanic world, and it was eventually outlawed. So you do find a couple of examples in the sagas, but in practice it would have been something really, really seldom. Then you had, of course, the blood feud, like the really Avenger type. And then you had this very complex, formal legal system with summoning and pleading and, presenting your case, gathering evidence, gathering support, accepting third parties, panels of judges, and so on and so forth. And then you also have arbitration, which was a kind of negotiation that could take part both in and outside of the courts. Of course, you could also combine all these methods to solve a particular conflict. And perhaps one of the most interesting elements of this whole system was the enforcement, because there was none. So the criminal act was considered as your private concern, your private affair. So regardless of the decision taken in a particular process, in a particular panel of judges or outside of the court system, and so on and so forth, it was actually your duty or the duty of the kin to enforce that. So that was valid for all sentences, even death sentences or sentence of outlawry, which was actually the worst that could happen to you. This was a private concern, and you were responsible for, I don't know, avenging your brother or your father or someone from your family or whatever. So this was your thing. There was no way of enforcing this, and this was actually the bit of the whole process that could lead to even more conflict. Interestingly, the assembly still met until 1798, but it was just a regular court, so it no longer had this political aspect. And due to its importance, actually, in the 19th century, it was restored as a gathering place for celebration. So, in the context of the fight for independence and the rise of nationalism all over Europe, and inevitably also in Iceland. Um, Now, the environment as well didn't really stay the same. You need to take into account that the assembly plains no longer looked as they did in the Middle Ages, because the terrain actually subsided by 4 meters, which led to pretty severe flooding. And this meant that the church also had to be relocated, and the council too. And this happened in the 16th century, and I think later on as well. Now, some interesting archaeological projects have been going on here lately, highlighting the importance of the place beyond the laws and sagas, and they have recovered very interesting objects and unique ones too. For example, the head of a bishop's crozier with Celtic design, the Tau crozier, which is the only example from Iceland of the kind. We also have coins, like coins struck for Emperor Otto III from the Holy Roman Empire, stating the importance of the place in trading relationships, so not only as a political gathering. And silver was also used to pay compensation, so it makes perfect sense to find something like that, as well as scale, weights, again highlighting the importance of trading. And from a religious standpoint, the development of Christianity is also noticeable here with the discovery of a jasper altar stone. And among the more precious objects, we have a knife hilt with an inlaid technique specific to Damascus, so Syrian design, as well as a scabbard tip or a silver foil from a bracelet cut for hack silver, which was again used as currency. Otherwise, sometimes it's very difficult to make sense of the landscape because we have overgrown traces of buildings, those booths I mentioned earlier. Chieftains used to build for themselves and for the Thingmen, and they were built on top of each other. And today, what we can see are actually remnants from the, let's say, 17th, 18th century. So we have these small buildings. Actually, they weren't that small because they needed to accommodate a lot of people. But at any rate, they were buildings made out of rock and turf, and potentially with fabric on a wooden frame. So they were, yeah, a sight to be seen, and some of them were actually the property, or the yeah, temporary property of very important people, such as the chieftain Snorri Thorgrimsson. Snorri Thorgrimsson, described as very knowledgeable chieftain in a lot of sagas, in Erbygja saga, for example, Laxdœla saga, the very important family sagas. He was from western Iceland, and not to be mistaken for Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the Prose Edda. This was Snorri Goði, Snorri the chieftain. Now, you will find Thingvellir in many references in the sagas, many interesting episodes as a backdrop for everything that's going on, for the plot. In the Njord saga, yeah, you'll find the hero Gunnar, for example, who meets his wife Hallgerður at one of these assemblies. And yeah, their story is a very dramatic one. As she says she's going to be the doom of him. But yeah, read the saga to find out more. Or there is one curious episode in the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson, where at a very old age he comes back to the Althing, and I think he wants to play a prank on the others because he wants to cast a coin and see the others fight for it. So such episodes can be found against the backdrop of this marvelous place, and as stated at the beginning of the video, truly the heart of Icelandic history. Well, all in all, I hope I was able to shed a little bit of light on this system that functioned in Viking Age Iceland, because it's truly a unique one in medieval European history. And if you did find it interesting, I kindly invite you to subscribe to my channel, because I have plenty of other videos and upcoming videos on similar topics: Icelandic history, the Viking Age, Germanic languages, and so on and so forth. Thank you so much for watching and for all your support. Wish you all the best, and till next time.